Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pat and Fina Horror Podcast. Fina is taking a short break for her mental health, but in today's podcast, we will be diving in on a book versus movie for The Exorcist. The Exorcist is one of the most influential horror stories ever created. We're comparing the original novel by William Peter Blatty with the legendary 1973 film adaptation directed by William Friedkin. Even if you've never watched The Exorcist, you've probably seen its influence. Possession movies, creepy children, priests battling demons, horror imagery. It all traces back to this story. This was the defining line of modern horror after, Psycho and Nosferatu. Anyway, the origin is William Peter Blatty published The Exorcist in 1971. The novel was partly inspired by reports of a real-life exorcism case involving a young boy in the late 1940s. Blatty wasn't trying to write a simple horror novel. He described the book as an exploration of faith. As its core, The Exorcist asks questions like, does evil exist, is there a God, and what happens when faith is tested? The demonic possession is very scary, but it's also a vehicle for those deeper questions. 2 years later, the film adaptation arrived and became a cultural phenomenon. Audiences fainted, audiences vomited, people left theaters, some religious groups debated it, and others praised it, and this film became one of the most famous horror movies ever made. The basic story remains the same in both versions. Chris McNeil is a successful actress living in Washington, D.C. with her daughter Reagan. Reagan begins acting strangely. At first, it seems like a medical problem, so she takes her to the doctor and performs tests after tests after tests, and nothing works, and her condition worsens. Soon, Reagan exhibits impossible behavior, speaking in strange voices, like a demonic voice, demonstrating unnatural strength, possessing knowledge she shouldn't have, and showing signs of apparent possession. Desperate, Chris turns to the church. Chris McNeil, the mother. Two priests eventually confront the evil entity and attempt an exorcism. That's the main story in both versions, and these differences come from how each version explores these events. Okay, let's start with the book. The biggest advantage of the book is depth. The movie has roughly 2 hours to tell its story. The novel has about 360 pages. The extra space allows Blatty to explore the characters far more thoroughly. Father Karras is clearly struggling with his faith in the movie, and in the novel, that struggle is much more detailed. We spend significant time inside his thoughts, and we learn about his guilt over his mother's suffering. We learn about his doubts. We see his intellectual side, and we understand why the demon targets him specifically. The book makes Karras feel incredibly human. By the end, his choices carry even greater emotional weight. Now we're going to get into Detective Kinderman. Kinderman is another character who benefits enormously from the novel. He's more than just an investigator. He's philosophical, funny, observant, curious about morality and human nature. This novel spends a lot of time with him discussing evil, crime, and faith. Many readers consider him one of the best characters in the whole book. This movie includes him but significantly reduces his role. The investigation. One thing that surprises many first-time readers is how much of the novel feels like a detective story. Characters don't immediately conclude that Reagan is possessed. They investigate, search for medical explanations, psychological explanations, and even scientific explanations. The book builds tension through uncertainty. The movie does this too, but the novel goes much further. And this novel often feels more disturbing than the film because it leaves room for imagination. Readers fill in details with their own minds. The uncertainty creates dread, and for a long stretch you're asking, is this really a demon or is there another explanation? That ambiguity can be incredibly unsettling. What the movie does better. Now let's talk about the film. Because honestly, the movie does some things better than the novel. Atmosphere. The atmosphere is unbelievable. The cold Georgetown streets, the gloomy interiors, the silence, the sense that something is wrong before anything supernatural even happens. Friedkin creates consistent tension. You feel uncomfortable long before the possession reaches its peak. Some scenes simply hit harder on screen. The spinning head, the levitation, the transformations, the physical deterioration of Reagan. These images become iconic for a reason. Reading about them is scary, seeing them is unforgettable. Ironically, one reason that this movie works so well is because it often feels realistic. The actors behave like real people, the doctors seem genuine, and the medical procedures feel authentic. And also, the camera style almost resembles a documentary at times. That realism makes the supernatural moments feel way more shocking. Now let's get into the pacing. The novel can be very slow. I thought it was kind of slow until it picked up. Some readers love that, others don't. The film trims a lot of material and moves more efficiently. Every scene feels important, the story stays focused, and for many viewers that makes the movie more accessible. The scariest version. This is the question everybody asks. Which one is scarier? The answer depends on what scares you the most. If disturbing imagery scares you more, the movie wins. The visuals are legendary. Some moments remain effective even decades later. But if psychological horror scares you more, the book might be worse. The novel spends more time building dread, exploring uncertainty, and letting your imagination work against you. Personally, many horror fans find the book creepier while finding the movie more shocking. I personally found the book scarier than the movie. I did not think the movie was that scary. Themes of faith. One thing people often miss is that The Exorcist isn't really about possession. It's about faith. Chris loses faith in science's ability to solve everything. Chris loses faith in religion. The demon attempts to destroy hope, and the story constantly asks whether goodness has meaning in a world where evil exists. The book explores these ideas more deeply because of its length, but the movie still communicates them effectively. In both versions, the emotional core isn't the demon. It's Karras, his struggle, his doubt, and his sacrifice. Which one aged better? This question is very hard because the novel has aged remarkably well, the writing still feels intelligent, the themes remain relevant, and the character work remains strong. The movie has also aged well, but some effects naturally show their age compared to modern filmmaking. Yet, despite that, many scenes remain powerful because they're grounded in practical effects and strong performances. Both versions have survived for decades because they're built on great storytelling rather than cheap scares. Now let's talk about some of the disturbing parts in this movie. The part that I found the most disturbing was where young 12-year-old Reagan is possessed and she takes a crucifix and shoves it up her hoo-ha multiple times while screaming, "Lick me, lick me, lick me," and spinning her head. It's obviously fake, but a lot of blood squirts out of the place where she sticks in the crucifix. I don't want to get demonetized for this. I'm just trying to say it as nicely as I can, even though the movie isn't nice at all. There's another scene where Reagan projectile vomits onto Karras. Like, it looks very fake. It's just like spewing vomit. There's a scene where Reagan's head turns like 180 like an owl. That's pretty creepy. There's a scene where she levitates off the bed. The bed is like shaking and stuff. Anyway, the final verdict. So, which version is better? If you want deeper characters, more philosophy, more investigation, and more psychological horror, then you should stick with the book. But if you want stronger atmosphere, iconic horror moments, faster pacing, and one of the greatest horror films ever made, go with the movie. My verdict, the book is probably the better horror experience, and the movie is probably the richer overall story. And that's why The Exorcist remains such a rare adaptation where both versions are considered classics. You can read the novel and still get something unique. You can watch the movie and still get something unique. Very few horror stories achieve that. Thanks for listening to today's episode comparing The Exorcist book and movie. Let us know which version you prefer and whether you think the novel's psychological depth beats the film's unforgettable horror imagery. Until next time, stay safe and maybe don't play with Ouija boards. Bye, everybody.